Well, thank you, Shannon. Thanks for having me here today, and thanks for everything you're doing, and thank you, Pastor, for hosting us here. I've lived in this area all my life, and I've never been in these doors, so I'm glad to finally have passed by and actually gone in. And thank all of you for being here today. And when you're in my role, you have an extra obligation to recognize certain people. And so, Commissioner Carrie Bloomer, thank you for joining us. Let's hear it for her. A truly new elected official. See, I've been called the new mayor a couple times today, and I would point out I've been mayor for over a year, so I don't know when I finally stopped being called that, but a truly new elected official, Councilman James Cooper, is here. And a lot of people don't even know sometimes that Metro Tech school board members are elected, but I think that should be acknowledged more often. So Miriam Campos, Metro Tech school board member, is here. And of course we have Amanda McLean Snipes representing Congresswoman Kendra Horn. But all of you are also very, very special. Just not elected anything. So thank you so much. Jan reminded me, she mentioned in her remarks earlier that she's heard me speak many times. That may in fact be true for many of you, and so I want to caution you up front. I don't have like 10 different speeches about diversity and inclusion, so if you've heard one of my speeches on this topic, you've probably heard them all. So there may be some recurring themes that you hear today, and I apologize in advance for that, but nevertheless, we did, as Shannon said, maybe we'll leave some time for questions, and then you can take this any crazy direction you want. So I know there's some business after me, so I won't be going till 1 o'clock, but maybe if I'll take my seat by 12:40 or so, well, I think, will that leave you enough time for your remaining business? But I will talk, the theme of the day is unity. I love that phrase, not without my neighbor. I think that's all very fitting for both the conversation, if it can be called that we're having at the national level, but also the conversation, and I think it can be called that we're having here in Oklahoma City. We're really undergoing a multi-year transition in Oklahoma City. It's a generational transition. You see that in the elected officials here today. It's worth noting that James and fellow council member Jo Beth Hammond created a new majority on the council of people 40 or younger. I just slip in there, but that it was unheard of 10 years ago. I mean, we had like 2 people under the age of 40, and now we have 2 people under the age of 60, and then now we have 5 under the age of 40. So that's a remarkable generational shift. You have a remarkable demographic shift happening in the city. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And you have, you kind of just have a shift in priorities. Sometimes that manifests itself politically, but in any case, whatever the conversation, you just have a sense that people are worried about slightly different things than they were 10 or 20 years ago here in Oklahoma City, and I think that's all to the good. But it does create the potential for attention, right? I mean, anytime there's transition and change, people can get uncomfortable, and so I think it's been really incumbent upon me as mayor to manage that as best I can in a way that it doesn't feel like one side is conquering the other, and it doesn't feel like there are sides at all. I need this to feel unified, because I think that's been really kind of our secret sauce here in Oklahoma City, has been really ever since what was an economic depression for us in the 80s, and then a horrible event in 1995. Out of all of that came a great deal of unity, and maybe it was born originally out of desperation, and maybe we're not so desperate anymore. Another reason why it has every possibility of eroding, and so I think it's really important that we continue to double down on that concept of unity, and we continue to find common ground, set aside the things that divide us. Don't always be trying to figure out what it is that you slightly disagree with me on and argue about it, but find the things that we have common ground on and common purpose. And I find that I've been at this, despite my age, I've been at this political thing for some time now, and I find that almost every question, no matter how divisive it may seem, there's really a solution that about 80% of us can get behind if we would just talk about it, and we'd be pragmatic and compromise on both sides of whatever issue it is. So I think as mayor, it's my responsibility, among many other things, to lead that conversation in a responsible way. And I'm not ignorant to the fact that there's different examples of how to navigate those waters at the state and federal level, especially at the federal level. And I don't think that's the way we want to go. It's certainly not the way I want to lead. And so, however, that's a part of our lives, and so I have to combat that as well, and I have to set a different example, and it's a very intentional example. So I hope you see that. I hope that that is apparent in the way that I serve as your mayor. But let me talk more specifically today about the diversity of our city. And I'll throw a few numbers at you that kind of, I think, define both the diversity of our city, but also the disconnect, perhaps, that we've had between that great city and its decision-making process. So let me provide one number up front. So before I became mayor, we had 35 mayors of Oklahoma City, and all 35 had come from North Oklahoma City. We're white people from Northwest Oklahoma City. Now, I am a white male from Northwest Oklahoma City, so I did everything I could to make that 36 for 36. That's a joke. But I wanted to be the white male from Northwest Oklahoma City who did things a little differently, who was a mayor for the whole city and recognized that half the city doesn't live in Northwest Oklahoma City. Half the city is not male, and that there's a growing group of people in this city who come from all different diverse backgrounds, and I mean that in every sense. And obviously today's audience is coming from the religious diversity background, but there's all kinds of diversity in our city that needs to be reflected in our decision-making process. So there's that. There's evidence there that, the power structure of our city, our decision-making process has been tilted towards, one group of people and maybe exclusive of others. But look also at our boards and commissions, because the mayor is not king. I don't make all the decisions in a vacuum. There's this whole network that we've built of advisory boards and decision-making boards that are led by citizens, and it's a great thing that we have that. We have a really kind of diffused power structure. However, it's diffused, again, among sort of a certain group of people. The Oklahoman did an analysis upon my taking office and found that 90% of the members, and these are hundreds of people, and some of them are probably in this room, but that 90% of our boards and commission members were white and 70% were male. And though it wasn't analyzed, I suspect a similarly high percentage came from Northwest Oklahoma City. And so again, you've got a lot of the power in this city being held by the few, or at least the half. And with another group of people entirely justifiably, oftentimes feeling left out of that process. And so I think it's interesting then to compare that. We kind of know probably current demographics, but look at the future, because it's even more pronounced. Under the age of 18 in Oklahoma City, the kids of Oklahoma City, it's 60% non-white. And kids have a way of growing up, so that's the future of Oklahoma City. This will be a majority-minority city from an ethnic perspective in just a few, years, a couple decades, if not sooner. So that's a reality. And so what are we doing to prepare for that day and to create a better today as well? And so, as I came into office, I kind of identified 4 things that I would talk about. Any good candidate, Carrie, who was pinpoints those things. She knows I have a list that's 40 pages long, but I picked 4 to talk about in the campaign. And they were core services, and they were, our quality of life and maps and education. But among those 4 was incorporating the diversity of our city into our decision-making process. And I'll be candid with you, my consultant said, could you use a different word other than diversity? It just, I don't know. And I said, I'm not trying to hide the ball here, I mean, this is a conversation we need to have. I don't want to have it in a way that's so abrasive that there's like a pushback, because I think we can see that, right? I mean, that happens, and that's lasting change, to my mind, is made, in a way that gets everybody to kind of come along with it. But having said that, I didn't want it to be so slow and so gradual that you didn't even realize it was happening. We needed to have this conversation. And so upon taking office, I have made moves that reflect that priority. And it ranges across the board, from symbolic to more substantive. Even before I took office, I don't talk a lot about the religious diversity of the city. First reason is I'm Episcopalian, so I don't talk about religion at all. But secondly, I do believe in the separation, but I recognize that was an aspect of our city's growing diversity, and I said this in my State of the City address. There is not a single religious tradition, I think, that exists on the planet that isn't practiced somewhere in Oklahoma City. Some may be more frequent than others, but everything is here now and everything is represented. So even before I took office, 2 days before I took office, I held an interfaith prayer service, and Rabbi Harris was there and prayed over me, and I'm very grateful for that. And when the thunder conflicted with the Seder, despite that, I still chose the thunder, and I'm sorry for that, Rabbi. So I owe you one still. But we had multiple faiths there, and then of course Congresswoman Horn and I attend the same church, so she kind of one-upped me, and she invited like 10 more faiths than I had. But she had a similar service a few months ago when she took office at St. Augustine of Canterbury Episcopal Church with Father Joe Alsay. I feel like he'd be really mad if I didn't say that. So I certainly wanted to recognize that. Then 2 days later, when I actually took office, I took, in the mayor's conference room, I don't know if any of you have ever been there, you're most welcome to come visit anytime, but it's a pretty important room. Lots of big stuff is discussed in there. Lots of important people spend time in there. And so it's a room that matters. And I, for as long as anybody could remember, it was covered in pictures of old mayors. That was the aesthetic. And so I respectfully moved them down the hall, but I replaced them with pictures of 20 Oklahoma City kids. And I chose models that were demographically representative of Oklahoma City's kids, those demographic shifts that I talked about earlier. And so when you look at the walls of my conference room, you numerically see, like, if you had all the kids of Oklahoma City, this is what it would look like. And again, that's the future of Oklahoma City. So that's what all of Oklahoma City is going to look like in just a few years. And I thought that was an important symbolic recognition. Maybe somewhere halfway in between symbolic and substantive is the way I use my platform. You do get a certain level of attention when you're the mayor. I was a state senator for 8 years, and I don't know if my next door neighbor knew or cared, probably. And if I had told him, he would have said, well, I guess everybody's got to have a job. But when you're mayor, it's a different deal. And everywhere you say, I just want to, not that I'm looking for sympathy, but I just want to say that treasure your anonymity, because when you're buying, Kraft mac and cheese at the grocery store and the clerk says, there you go, Mr. Mayor, it kind of snaps you out of your delusion that you're doing this privately. But so anyways, I have a platform, and that can be used for good or evil, and I choose to use it for what I believe is good, which is getting people out of their bubbles. So we are one of the 5 largest cities in the United States, 620 square miles. So why do I say that? Because you quite literally can put yourself in a bubble. You can physically separate yourself, and we're a very segregated city, even despite so much good that has happened in the last 40 years. You can still say Northeast Oklahoma City, and people understand you mean the African American community. Well, as long as you can simply say geographic locations and everybody understands that you mean certain groups of people, we're living in a segregated city. And so we create these bubbles around ourselves, and we don't really experience all of the diversity that the city has to offer. But I can maybe drag you out of your bubble a little bit, and that's one of the good things, I think, of social media and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. If you follow me in any of those places, and you should, but if you follow me on any of those places, hopefully you're just sick of seeing all this stuff all over Oklahoma City that you never knew existed. And this is maybe an audience that's more familiar with all the diversity of Oklahoma City, but I think I'm reaching a lot of people and showing them things that they just didn't really know about, and hopefully inspiring them to get out of their house and not just look at it on their phone, but go experience it in real life and start to see I think people travel around the country and the world to experience things that they could experience 5 miles from their house, and I certainly want to give them that opportunity and open their eyes a little bit to that. Now, I'd say on the most substantive side of what I've tried to do is, of course, boards and commissions, and that's a slow process. I don't have, when a mayor takes office, you're not suddenly handed all of the appointments. They're in terms and it's staggered, and so it takes a while. And some of the boards and commissions have certain requirements and things, and not all of it's always my choice. Sometimes it's you get 3 choices from this group or whatever. I mean, there's lots of, every single one's got its own parameters. But where I can, I have certainly sought to appoint people that represent all the different sectors of our community, and so it's not just ethnic diversity, it is that as well, but it's age diversity, it's geographic diversity, and it's gender diversity, and just making sure that I think if you go at those things, I understand that everybody's unique, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but I think if you do broaden the tent a bit, you are bound to catch some different perspectives and some different worldviews that we really need to have. Because otherwise it's not really sustainable to have 650,000 people in the city and ultimately 1.4 million in the metro, trying to live on top of each other. I mean, it's a very compromising existence to live in a city. You don't get to do just what you want to do, right? Like you have to be more pragmatic and negotiate your lifestyle with all of your neighbors. And to do that and have that be a sustainable model, we have to all kind of have a voice in that negotiation, And so it's really, really important for the long-time viability of this community and any community that everybody is heard and everybody has a seat at the table. And so that's what I'm trying to do and leave that legacy for however many years I do this, is to build a bigger table so that all of the city is at that table. And then I think in that sense, we won't leave our neighbors behind, and we will preserve what I think is actually a very unique unity that we have here in Oklahoma City. So with that, I think maybe now would be a good time, if you've had a few minutes while you've not been listening to what I said, you've been thinking about your question, now's the time to lay it on me, and I would be happy to go. Way to be first.
The homeless grant
yeah.
Came out in the news. Can you talk about that?
Certainly. So this is interesting. That's like a 5-minute answer. I hope you're ready for this, because I'm going to back up and talk just about homelessness in its totality from a city perspective. In Oklahoma City, our government, we had until about a year ago only spent somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 of actual general revenue funds on homelessness, and then we basically doubled it so that essentially Homeless Alliance could run the day shelter 7 days a week. And so now it's a little over $300,000. Now we also manage some federal grants, and so that adds more to that. But with your tax dollars, your city tax dollars, we only spend about $300,000 on homelessness, which, that means there's a lot more money than that being spent on homelessness in this community, which means that we're really not leading the charge. It's something we have long depended on the nonprofit sector to do. And I should say, I wanted to open this speech by, there's so many people in this room from the nonprofit and obviously from the church community here in Oklahoma City who do so much, and certainly homelessness is a leading area. I know there's people in this room that are intimately involved in helping that issue, but I think the city probably should bring a little bit more to the table. We also, because that's the funding side of it, we're also a convener. I mean, people look to their mayor and their city government and their council members for, just to kind of provide guidance and leadership and be the place where everybody kind of comes together and has those conversations and emerges with a plan that everybody has bought into. Well, when it comes to homelessness, we did have a plan a bit over a decade ago. A lot of people came together and they created the 10-year plan to end homelessness. Well, it's been over 10 years and we still have homelessness, and maybe that was always aspirational. I wouldn't knock them for not having accomplished that task, but it is the name of that plan itself is a reminder that we probably ought to do this occasionally. And so as I came into office, that need became fairly apparent, that we were not even really working off that plan anymore. Everybody's just kind of doing their thing. And there's actually quite a bit of coordination in the homeless service provider community opportunity. But I think a plan is always a good idea. And a lot of others did as well. So Inasmuch was really interested, Bob Ross particularly, in this conversation. And so they offered to fund a consultant to staff a task force that will work over the next few months on a new global strategy to address homelessness in Oklahoma City. And so that task force of about 20 plus people actually started yesterday, and Councilman Cooper is on it, and as well as Councilwoman Nice and Councilwoman Hammond and other people from all different perspectives on that issue. And so I think they'll emerge with something that reflects the most cutting edge approaches in that area, and I'm grateful to Inasmuch for funding the consulting side of it, and then we'll see what comes out of it. In the meantime, even before it's really done, you know, we're also having a MAPS 4 conversation, and I see an opportunity there for to provide some funding potentially for homelessness issues or affordable housing issues, and so we'll kind of see how that evolves in the next 3 or 4 months. But I think there's a lot of conversations about that issue, as there should be. Yes, sir. Yeah, blue glasses.
It seems to me many of our elected officials and people on boards are usually business owners or lawyers or big retired. And I was wondering how you're addressing professional diversity. So I think like elementary teachers, nurses, therapists, engineers, people whose day job is very hard for them to say, hey, it's me, I've already networked and I know these people. Normal people need to be asked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. Now, when it comes to elected officials, it's a little out of my control. I mean, I'm always encouraging people to have those conversations about the way we have structured things in Oklahoma, both at the mayor and council and at the legislative level, because we don't pay living wages to any of those people, you do tend to end up with retirees or people of certain professions that have a lot more flexibility, and I don't know that that's how you want to structure it, you know. And we actually we just put a charter change amendment so that teachers and other state employees could even run for council. We'd actually prohibited that, full-time teachers. And so, like Councilman Cooper has figured out how to make it work, but if the charter change amendment happens, then that'll be voted on in July by the voters. He'd have a little more flexibility, and other people could maybe look at something that right now isn't even an option. So, but that's the elected official side. From the appointment side, yeah, I mean, I think that's a point well made. You know, I think we all, those of us who get those opportunities to appoint people, and I share that in many ways on many of these boards with the council members who also put forward names for a lot of these boards. I think it's important that we do everything we can to have as broad a network as possible. I mean, sometimes that's the limitation. You know, I don't even have staff to like work on boards and commissions, so it really falls on me personally, and it falls to it really ends up being a question of, well, who do you know? You know, and so I certainly encourage people to force themselves into our sphere to become people we know if they're interested in it. That helps. I mean, there's a mutual responsibility there, but it's also incumbent upon me as mayor and on council members to make sure we're talking to a broad group of people. Hopefully the campaign is often sort of the process by which you sort of build a larger network, and you get, you know, beyond just the donor class, as they're called, you know, and you find people who are interested and capable in these topics, but maybe, you know, just aren't naturally the first people you gravitate to for whatever historical reason that is. So, but yeah, professional diversity, I think, is a point well made. Yes, ma'am.
All right, so the current U.S. administration is forging ties with several conservative countries like Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Bahrain, to erode gender rights and sexual and reproductive rights of women. And gender disparity is a real issue in STEM fields. There's the women in politics, weight female incarceration, domestic violence. So what concrete steps are you thinking of taking, or what strategic vision do you have to decrease gender disparity right here in Oklahoma?
Yeah, well, you touched on so many different, ways that it manifests itself, and some of which I have more influence on than others, and like when you talk about STEM and education, in our state, we've divorced cities and school districts, so I have less impact there. It's a conversation I hope we can continue to have in the years ahead, but when you talk about just influence and decision-making, it kind of harkens back to what I was talking about a minute ago. I mean, if you have boards and commissions, for example, that are 70% male, not only are decisions just generally going to tilt towards a male perspective, but you're also not even providing any sort of examples. It's just self-perpetuating, that young girls, and I'm the father of one, growing up in Oklahoma City, have fewer role models. What's exciting in the current era of our politics here in Oklahoma City is that the voters have taken that into their own hands and are providing all kinds of role models for young women here in Oklahoma City, and obviously we have one sitting right in front of me. But I mean, election night just a few months ago in November, I couldn't even remember. I mean, it was like every judge elected was a woman, our congresswoman was a woman, like every single state legislator in Northwest Oklahoma City was a woman, Carrie was elected. I mean, it was just, Nikki Nice was elected. I mean, it was kind of a clean sweep and good, because we had a lot to make up for, so that helps and obviously brings more different perspectives into governance. When you talk about other challenges that are put in front of the women of Oklahoma, like domestic violence, that's a conversation we continue to have. I do everything I can to support Jan and the YWCA. And then we also, on a related front, YWCA does work over at Palomar, where other YWCA and other agencies kind of pool their resources to meet the needs of domestic violence victims. And we are actually, that's a very viable conversation in the context of MAPS 4, building a new facility for Palomar. So, because they need it. Their current one was always designed to be a temporary solution. And so that's funding is a way we can try to provide assistance. But I'm open to, anything else. Obviously, from a city perspective, we again, somewhat limited options, but anything we can do to address the things that you're talking about. I mean, I'm 40. I was born in a world where, I view gender very differently probably than my grandfather did or whatever. And it even kind of it's reflected in our own family. I mean, my wife is the COO of the Office of Juvenile Affairs, and if anybody tries to call her the First Lady of Oklahoma City, she'll slap them, I mean, because she doesn't want to be defined by my job, that she's got a big job, she's a successful professional in her own right. So it's a changing world, and obviously we want Oklahoma City to be at the forefront of that. And I'm fully cognizant that traditional gender roles have been predominant in this city for a long time. But I think the rising generation of women in this city are done with that, and I'm heartened that it seems like a lot of other people are as well. Yes, sir.
Getting back to homeless, I used to work down at the downtown library, and during the day we get quite a few homeless people in there. Of course, it's not a very wide demographic, but a pretty high percentage, since it seemed to be veterans, everything from the Vietnam War, to our current conflicts. So just wondering if any military-related service like the VA or any other, like the DFW or any of these other groups were brought into the discussion on homelessness.
Yeah, I am not 100% off the top of my head. I can't remember every single person that's on it, but I know that there are multiple people in the discussion that are kind of over umbrella agencies. So like Dan Strong with Homeless Alliance. I mean, I know he works very closely with veterans groups. That's always a high priority, obviously, is to make sure that our veterans are not homeless. And so I know there's people in that room who have that at heart. We could probably, if you're interested, I'm gonna delegate that. Let's give that to Homelessness Task Force member James Cooper. Could maybe even follow up with you to.
Well, no, it's a good point, because yesterday when we met for the first time at the downtown, I was thinking exactly what you were like. Oh my goodness, how did this happen? But right now, as we're putting out the RFPs, the request for proposals for the consulting that will be helping us find all those best practices and utilizing our streets that we already have with these different agencies. We have this period of time right now where we can speak to what are some things we want to make sure is in that scope of work. And so just as an example, yesterday I mentioned, because Senator Hicks and I attended SISU youth services, and I learned 40%, number probably maybe know, 40% of our homeless youth are LGBT for reasons that you know. And so I made sure that that was something that we addressed. And to the mayor's point, there are already agencies involved, in that conversation if it's like need change or whatever. So I'll be sure to make sure that homelessness with our veterans is something that we next look forward to.
So it's 12:40, so maybe one more question if you have it. Yes, sir.
I believe that as we have more and more discussions about diversity, we oftentimes run into an issue between empowering minorities and, I guess for lack of a better term, being like a white savior in minority communities. How do you make sure that line isn't very murky, but that the things that you do are really intentional in creating empowerment for those communities, for people in those communities?
Yeah, now what do you, and forgive me for not knowing, what do you mean by a white savior? What do you mean by that?
White saviorism is kind of a person who goes into a community and says that, these people can't really do it on their own, so I have to do it. They bring in their own organizations.
Right.
Restructure.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that's where good-hearted and well-intentioned people often in Oklahoma City have gone wrong is exactly that, where I just can't, I've only been, again, I'm only 40, but I've been around City Hall for like 15 years, and I can't tell you how many times, especially when it comes to Northeast Oklahoma City, is what comes to mind most notably, is well-intentioned people just decide this is what the African American community of Northeast Oklahoma City needs or wants without really asking them, And I think you just have to. My approach is just shut it down. I don't try to answer those questions. I listen and whether I think what happens is leaders come from Northeast and they say, this is what we want. And traditionally in Oklahoma City, people in positions like mine have said, well, are you sure? How about this? And they're not, it's not a malicious thing, but it's wrong. And they need to listen and they need to actually just act on it and not try to be sort of paternally helping, and be, as you characterized, a white savior, So now I think the change has to be that that communities that have oftentimes had other people trying to step in and tell them what it is that they need, that needs to stop, and there are plenty of leaders from every community in our city that are ready to be listened to and are ready to see their ideas implemented, and it's incumbent on everybody else to say okay instead of well, which is I think has been too often the approach in the past. By the way, I said earlier that my wife would slap you. She wouldn't really slap you. What she says is, in case you run into her later today, what she always says is, it's not a thing. That's her standard answer. If you say she's the first lady, she says that's not a thing. So more accurate and. Thank you very much.